All right, we are live. I'm Peter van Valkenburgh. I'm going to be the chair of this next and final panel. This panel is about the Dev Fund, the expiration of our current Dev Fund and the prospects and possibilities for a future one or for not a future one. We have four excellent guests. Two of them are in the leadership of our two bigger organizations in this community, building the Zcash protocol. Josh Swihart from the Electronic Coin Company and Jack Gavigan from the Zcash Foundation. And we have two community members who have been outspoken on the forums and elsewhere about matters such as the Dev Fund. So with those brief introductions out of the way, I want to give each of you a chance to sort of give a slightly longer intro about, what has brought you to this space, what role do you play in the Zcash ecosystem, yeah, I'll let you guys go ahead. I'll start with Josh.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, this will be a fun conversation, I think, this afternoon. So yeah, again, my name is Josh Swihart. I'm the CEO of ECC, the Electric Coin Company. We're actually wholly owned by Bootstrap. So Bootstrap.org is a US-based 501c3 nonprofit, and Bootstrap is actually the recipient of the Dev Fund today. So we receive about 7% of the block rewards today. As far as me, like I've only been the CEO since the end of December.
Congratulations, Josh.
Yeah,
I actually haven't
you.
spoken to you in person since then. So congratulations.
I know. Thank you. So I was here. I mean, I was an executive at ECC. I joined in 2018 after falling in love with the project and essentially knocking on ECC's door for many, many months for them to let me in and come work on it full time. And so eventually they did. It took them maybe close to a year to do that, but eventually brought me in. And then I worked at ECC through July of last year. So ZCon last year was actually my last day at ECC for some period of months before I came back in December.
Jack?
Hi, I'm Jack Gavigan, Executive Director of the Zcash Foundation. I have a background in the traditional financial sector. I used to work for big banks and build trading systems, stuff like that. But I got interested in decentralized technology and how it can be applied to finance. And through that, ended up hearing about Bitcoin. And then through a fairly random introduction, I met Zuko back in 2015 while he was getting the Electric Coin Company going to build Zcash. And I became an advisor to ECC. And then shortly before Zcash actually launched in October 2016, I joined the company as an employee. I started off as COO before handing those particular reins over. And I did various other roles kind of around project management, product management, finishing up focusing on regulatory relations. And in early 2021, I left ECC and I moved to the Zcash Foundation, where I took over as executive director from Anthony, who had been acting as interim executive director following the departure of Josh Cincinnati, who had helped get the organization up and running and had steered it through its first, I think, 2.5 to 3 years. So I've been in this role now for a little over 3 years, and my role here, I think, is really to help the community navigate this problem. We're not actually advocating for a specific outcome in this whole discussion, but we see our role as being important in terms of giving the community a voice in this whole discussion and ensuring that disparate voices can be heard.
Right. GGuy? Is it GGuy? I just see your written out quite often. I don't know how to pronounce it.
GGuy, yeah, that's it. That's the one. Yeah, so my background, software engineer, the nerdy kid, etc. Moving up the track, discovered blockchain, Bitcoin, all the rest of it, Ethereum, and now Zcash. And I am also on the ZCG, Zcash Community Grants Committee. I was elected in July 2023, so I've been there almost a year now. And yeah, I think I'm here because I speak out about what I think a dev fund could look like, and my primary sort of thoughts on the topics are I think it's important for funding in general to be decentralized, which I'll talk about later, I guess. And yeah, how can we enable the community to exercise their power, I guess you could say, to control what they think the outcomes should be.
And finally, Noamchom, who is probably not actually Noam Chomsky.
No, I don't think Professor Chomsky is in the at this point in his career involved in Zcash. So I have a bachelor's of science in computer science and almost 20 years of experience in the software industry as someone that's worn a few hats. I've been a V&V engineer, a test engineer, quality assurance engineer, a variety of different roles that involve testing software and being a process regulator and working with project managers and software engineers and doing a little bit of small team management as well. I was dunked in the water in the crypto world in the Bitcoin 2013 bubble. Since then, I've just kind of participated in a handful of different crypto projects as, just sort of like a forum lurker, somebody elbowing people in the ribs. I imagine myself as a thought leader. I try and be respectful. I like to have, a debate. I like to ask critical questions. But all that's in the role as just sort of an activist retail investor. Crypto really does provide people, it's flat. So we buy and sell coins. We can participate in communities online. I think it's, that's part of the story that crypto gives to the world. It flattens an asset class and it makes technology accessible. It makes a lot of things accessible that, the S&P 500, the big companies don't, things are not accessible in that respect. So, but yeah, for Zcash specifically, I've been here since 2018. I only got active in the forum when I found out about the forum in the kind of like the end of the 2021 excitement cycle. As a computer science guy and someone with a mind in software, the technology that Zcash's base layer has is, it's inspiring, it's innovative, it's world class, and so it's always been the technology that's kept me attracted to the project. And the forum exists as a place where hopefully more folks like myself can get involved and try and affect thinking and try and affect project direction and just represent what we all like about crypto, which is it's decentralized, it's flat, it's accessible, it's permissionless. That's why I'm here.
Great. So I think it was, I'm getting feedback from somebody. Test. Okay, it's good. It's gone. So I think it was Vitalik Buterin who said at some point while arguing with probably Bitcoiners, maybe somebody else, that all consensus is social consensus. The idea being that, yeah, there's a lot of math and cryptography that's essential to the way cryptocurrencies operate. But at the end of the day, the decision by the several individual and autonomous participants on the network of which software to run, embodying which consensus rules, is a subjective social decision. And so that's the lens that I look through generally when I think about really hard choices about protocol rules. And the dev fund is one of those hard choices. At the end of the day, the Zcash dev fund will be whatever the software describes it. So if nobody changes that software, this dev fund expires. If somebody does want to change that software, or several people want to change that software, if they all change it together, all these individual people running this software, there can be a new or a different dev fund. If some do one thing and some do another, we could have a break in consensus, a so-called contentious hard fork like ETH Classic and Ether. This is ultimately how this decision will be made. What software do people choose to run on their internet-connected devices? And that is, I think, one of the amazing and beautiful things about cryptocurrency. It's, as Noamchom was just saying, really, truly flat. But obviously, as we move forward over the next few weeks, months, and years debating these things, there are processes involved with trying to decide what software people should run. Would somebody like to, for the benefit of the audience, especially for people who maybe are somewhat newer to the Zcash community, want to give a rough summary of some of those important processes and mechanisms so that before we get to an actual discussion of what should the next dev fund look like, or should there even be one, we can talk about sort of what are the lumpier parts of this big woolly ecosystem that will be relevant in making that decision.
I guess I'll take that one.
I was about to draft you anyway, Jack.
So, as you say, social consensus is the key decider. In practice, whether a change such as the institution or changes of a dev fund gets implemented on the Zcash blockchain through a change to the protocol is it's a matter for agreement between the Electric Coin Company and the Zcash Foundation. And the reason for that is because the Electric Coin Company registered Zcash and its logos as trademarks in various jurisdictions around the world. And what that meant was that, for example, during the really early days of Zcash, like really early, when somebody on the internet decided that they were going to fork Zcash, remove the founder's reward, and call it Zcash Classic, the Electric Coin Company was able to say to them, you can't do that. And that was that's the use to which the trademark can be put. It can be put to other uses like taking down scam sites and whatnot, but that means that the trademark means that whoever controls that trademark gets to effectively decide what Zcash is. They can go to an exchange and say, that a coin that you're listing that you're calling Zcash, that's not Zcash because we have the trademark. We require you to delist it or stop calling it Zcash. Now, in I think it was 2019, before the current dev fund was put in place, the Electric Coin Company and the Zcash Foundation reached an agreement, and that agreement is published. If you just search for Zcash trademark agreement, you can find the details of it, whereby ownership of the trademarks was transferred to the Zcash Foundation under an agreement which included various provisions around how the trademarks were to be protected and enforced and whatnot, but also included key provisions around how the use of the trademarks could be exercised to define what Zcash is. And essentially it says that if either ECC or the Zcash Foundation propose a network upgrade, which is the term we use for a change to the Zcash protocol, something that could, in theory, result in a hard fork, then both organizations must agree as to whether the new chain that results from that network upgrade will be called Zcash, or will not be called Zcash if the old chain should continue. And if both organizations do not agree, then neither chain can be called Zcash. So there's an element of mutually assured destruction, that a forcing function that requires that both organizations agree. Additionally, in that agreement, there's a requirement that both organizations respect the clear consensus of the Zcash community. Now, unfortunately, that how to assess the clear consensus isn't defined, but that essentially is how the process works at the moment from a sort of a legalistic perspective. Now, with regards to the original dev fund, what happened was both the Zcash Foundation and ECC, supported a grassroots process whereby various individuals and groups, including Josh Cincinnati from the Zcash Foundation, put forward proposals for how the Zcash ecosystem should be funded after the end of the Founders Reward. I think there were 13 proposals. They were put to votes of the Zcash Foundation's Community Governance Panel, as it was called at the time. It's now called Zcash Community Advisory Panel. There was a forum vote for people who had been members of the forum for a certain amount of time. There was some coin holder voting in a very kind of ad hoc way. And there was miners were invited to signal what they thought should happen, but none in the end did so. That process led to a narrowing down from 13 proposals to 3 that had garnered sufficient support to be included in the next stage, which was basically a negotiation or a conflation of these different proposals into a draft zip, which was then put to the community along with certain specific questions around some details. And that's what led to zip 1014. In terms of how we replicate that process, or how we follow that process, or how we repeat that process, that's something that we need to figure out. We, the Zcash Foundation, are committed to helping the Zcash community reach consensus on these questions. We haven't put forward our own proposal. We feel that, in our position, that could be seen as acting in a way that's not appropriate. Obviously, we are conflicted because the entirety of our funding comes from the Zcash Dev Fund. So we do hope that the Zcash community continues to fund us. But if they decide against funding us, or if they decide to allow the Dev Fund to expire with no mechanism to replace it, then we will support that decision, and we will enable that or enact that decision in our Zebra node implementation. So yeah, that's the kind of cliff notes of how decisions are reached, the messy process, the sausage making process of reaching decisions such as this in the Zcash community.
That was very helpful history, I think. And I do want to turn to Josh now, because I know that ECC recently announced a sort of a perspective on the matter of the trademark agreement, and also some early thoughts on future dev fund directions. So I'll let Josh take it from there.
Yeah, I'll just hit that. I mean, I'll hit the trademark and that specifically, but so the trademark, kind of having lived through that process as well. In fact, the first iteration in plain language that went to our attorney was something I wrote in my kitchen on a Saturday morning. So, but it was born out of distrust. It was born out of drama in the community. And the reason I say that is just because there was an intention for ECC to just donate the trademark to the foundation, straight up. But there was concern at the time that we wouldn't be able to get agreement between the two organizations on what consensus was. Now the trademark, keep in mind, there's multiple pieces of a trademark, right? So there's the name Zcash, there's the symbol Zec, there's the word mark, as well as the symbol, and those are protected in different ways in different jurisdictions. So it's not global coverage. It's wide coverage for Zcash, but it's not global coverage. So for example, you can't protect, it's not covered in China, I don't believe. But there's a number of jurisdictions where it's difficult, or it's difficult to enforce. But we, the decision, so we made a decision, we made an announcement that we will terminate the trademark. And we wanted to do that before, not the trademark, excuse me, but the trademark agreement. And we wanted to do that before there's a dev fund conversation, because we don't, in doing that, we don't want there to be kind of a perception that somehow we'll use the trademark agreement and our assessment of community sentiment to determine the outcome of the dev fund. So we're saying we're going to walk away from it. We're not going to do a 202 multi-sig. We're not going to use it to try to affect a change here. We want to see the community's voice and the community's will clearly respected. There's different ways to terminate the agreement. So we said pending negotiation with the foundation was the framing. So Jack and I have a call on next Tuesday, I think, next week to start that conversation about those pieces. So there's a provision in the agreement that allows ECC, or it allows either party a 90-day out, and then there's consequences of the out, right? So if ECC makes a unilateral decision, then we lose the ability to use the mark. We can't support the Zcash website without the foundation's approval, or run the Twitter account, unless the foundation gives us license agreement. There's provisions that allow for mutual termination, if that's deemed to be a better option. So it was envisioned in the original language that this might not live forever, and that there was different mechanisms that might make sense, or different reasons that might make sense. And we felt like now was the time to move away from that agreement.
I guess as a quick follow-up, Josh, because I think this might be a question some people have in their minds. I appreciate very much the idea that, we should be sure that we're not using intellectual property as a blunt instrument to overwhelm the will of the community. I'm definitely, for my entire life as a lawyer, and before that, when I was just an advocate in the tech space, a big fan of, good tech triumphs. Usually copyright, patent, and even trademark sometimes gets in the way of good tech triumphing. See the abuse of copyright laws in the early days of the internet to try and stifle public debate and the open internet. But the way we were describing the trademark agreement made it sound like both parties were mutually distrustful. And I think that's right. To some extent, still to this day. That's kind of the beauty of cryptocurrencies, is that we can reach agreement on chain, even if we're all strangers in some way or mutually distrustful. That's pretty good tech. And given that mutual distrust, it was a way for the two active software development groups in the space to have a kind of veto right. If you saw the other one not obeying the will of the community, if you will, you could then threaten to blow up the trademark. It wouldn't be that you'd sort of like say, no, mine is the real Zcash. You would just say, well, you're not acting in good faith, so now there is no Zcash. It was mutually assured destruction. So I guess my question is, does ending the agreement make it more likely that we'll be able to surface the interests of the community, or does it actually remove a tool that was useful for helping keep each other honest in surfacing the will of the community?
That's a great question. So there's two pieces to it. There's kind of philosophically, and there's kind of a regulatory piece to it. So, philosophically, it requires at the end of the day for both organizations to come to an agreement on how we're going to get consensus for the community, and for the organizations to then publicly assert through the signing of a document that says we agree that this particular chain is Zcash, and then post that up on the internet. So I have a kind of a philosophical belief that as a public good, there should not be two organizations that make that decision. There should not be two signatures on a piece of paper that says this is what the true chain is. And instead, it happens through consensus. It happens through what nodes people choose to run, what people choose to do. So that's kind of the philosophical thing. The other thing is related to regulatory. And there's a kind of elephant in the room, something that we don't talk about very much. And it was in the foundation's last financial report I published something in my weekly update on the forum. Both the foundation and ECC are under subpoena by the SEC, currently under subpoena by the SEC. Now, I believe we've all done our filings, and hopefully it's all dead and we feel very good about the position. But we were the targets, the two owners of the trademark. There's a reason that only these two organizations, and that these two organizations were selected to be subpoenaed. So we have a public good chain that is supposed to be worldwide, a worldwide public good for the use of the community, using kind of legacy regulatory copyright trademark, excuse me. And then on top of that, it creates brittleness, it creates weakness by not being as decentralized, or to perceived to be not as decentralized. So that was, whether or not people agree or not, that was ECC's rationale, and that's the reason we took the step.
Got it. I've always thought the trademark is the least evil of the intellectual properties, because it's really just there to avoid brand confusion. It's not there to claim ownership over something that's underlying the mark. Like, you can't say that we own Zcash. We just own the thing that helps people recognize what Zcash has been through time. And you can always still fork the chain, right? And you can run something else. All right. I want to bring
with this change, just real quick, with this change, if it's a unilateral break of the termination of the trademark agreement, the Zcash Foundation will have the sole responsibility and choice to name whatever change. If there's a fork, for example, and I hope there is not, I don't believe that there will be. But if something like that were to happen, then they would have the ability unilaterally to make the decision within those jurisdictions in which it's protected.
Yeah. And there's all sorts of other options as well. I mean, one thing that's come to my mind is a sort of defensive patent pool that could be much larger, not patent, but trademark pool. We could bring more entities into some sort of a defending the mark agreement. But let's not get too sidetracked into the trademark discussion unless we have time to circle back to it. I want to bring in GGuy to talk about sort of the way that the community gets involved in the decision-making process, the way that he's gotten involved in the decision-making progress, and any remarks you have about sort of the trademark and the way we awkwardly try and grope towards consensus in this space.
Yeah, so I will just point out that when I think of what I do and how I advocate for my beliefs and what I think maybe some other people's beliefs are, I do think of it like, there is the trademark and there is a clause in there which says, look at community consensus or sentiment and try and, leverage, some form of process where if there is a strong suggestion that there is community sentiment or consensus in a certain direction, then would be able to pull that lever, I guess you could say, and let our voices be heard. But I don't want to get too bogged down in the trademark thing, because if the trademark just didn't exist at all, there is, for example, as we say, right, it's the nodes that people run that decide on Thingo. But I was joking to someone only yesterday saying, well, wouldn't it be funny if I just announced, oh, look, I've got a Zcash go to my GitHub page, GGuy/Zcash, and go run my node. Who's going to run that node? Not many people are going to run that node. So I think there's also some other, what powers can the community leverage that would allow them to, allow their decision-making processes and ideas be heard. And I think if there is no trademark, well, then other things become very important to that power, like domain names, right? If you go and say, I'm going to run a Zcash node, where's the most official place to find out where to get that? Well, zcash.com or something like that. So I think those things become very powerful. So I think I don't want to get too bogged down, because I think community decision-making processes can work in both scenarios. I just think we need to make sure that the power is balanced, so that, for example, not one entity controls a zcash.com domain, because then that becomes the power leverage that might make things more centralized or
Yeah.
otherwise. So I think just reflecting on those things. And then, yeah, just talking more in general from a community decision-making process. I think that's what we have to do as a community, is to talk to each other publicly. Currently, we utilize Zcash forums a lot for that stuff. But yeah, I think that's how we make decisions. And if we can make sure that whatever outcomes we have from the dev fund allow us to leverage and follow those community sentiments, it's a good thing.
Noam, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just had kind of like a metaphor to add, and I have a meme. I liked Josh's liberal use of memes in talk the other day. So some of us have been to big cities, and I remember this happened when I was a teenager. I had my first experience with like knockoff Rolex and knockoff Nike apparel. My belief about the trademark agreement is that, yes, there are important organizational and sort of like there's some legacy things to work through, but in the practical sense, the market will decide very quickly where the real Zcash is. So I don't think that, I mean, I understand that there are mechanics and processes in place that we've got to see to the end, but the market will know, the market will decide the real Zcash. You know, I just kind of feel like, right, crypto is rampant with people trying to rip off technology and steal brand names and steal brand perception and steal the next like concept of a Pepe coin, Shiba Inu, or whatever it is. The market sorts things out quickly. So I think that also needs to be raised in this context of the trademark decision making.
Yeah.
The second item I had, I'm going to try and share. I only had 2 memes ready. So, and this first meme fits this topic. Eerily, I had kind of leveraged Josh's ship meme theme, and I wanted to call out the ship of Theseus paradox, where you could replace one plank and perhaps it's still a ship, but if you've replaced all planks and then 100 years later, you've had multiple captains, you've had multiple instances of planks replaced, you know, we're in that situation. And Zcash, if we think this is going to exist for 100 years into the future, we've got to kind of have faith in the ecosystem that social consensus will determine the ship of Zcash. And so it's kind of like we're here carrying torches right now, and for the next 50 years, we're going to have different people carrying torches, different software engineers writing code, merging to trunk. You're going to have people that want to fork. It's ultimately social consensus that I think is going to let us understand what Zcash is.
You could kind of think of the trademark agreement and other sort of attempts at sort of bringing a degree of order to that chaotic process. Is like the body's immune system. Like my favorite fact about the body is that you get a brand new skeleton roughly every 5 years. Literally every bone in your body gets scraped off and rebuilt by oocytes, I think is what they're called. And so you're really not you after 5 years, and that's the slowest part of your body to regenerate is your bones. And it's the immune system that kind of steps in and tries to make sure that you don't start regenerating in bad directions, right? Or just dying. But at the end of the day, yeah, I don't know what I'm rambling about now.
No, same thing for Zcash, right? You know, the whole node's going to be replaced. Zcash D to Zebra D, right?
Yeah.
All right. So we've got.
Sorry, I just want to jump in on the ship of Theseus thing. Here in the UK, there's a deeply loved comedy show in which a character who's a road sweeper, he literally cleans the roads, claims that he's used the same broom for 20 years. People are like, what, really? You know, and doesn't it get worn out? And he says, no, I've replaced the handle 17 times. I've replaced the head 25 times. It's the same broom. And you know, Zcash is going to be like that. We'll have replaced everything. We've replaced all the software, but it'll still be, you know, at its core, Zcash is the protocol. You know, it's the protocol that that everybody runs and everybody, you know, agrees on. So yeah, all of these details are really just just mechanisms for reaching that social consensus. So I see the trademark really as a detail. It allows us to bring some order to the chaos, because in certain situations, the certain types of organizations and people, including scammers and fraudsters, thrive in chaos. And being able to bring at least some order to it, albeit one that's crafted by the community, I think benefits us.
All right, so I think I want to now turn to the substance of the dev fund itself. I think I'd like to just go to each of you in turn. We'll go alphabetically. That makes sense. And if you could give like a general statement of your personal preference, I probably may or may not want to speak for your organizations to the extent you are at organizations, for the next dev fund or not dev fund. And it's completely okay to answer that question with, I think it's inappropriate to voice a strong preference here or something like that, because I'm still thinking. But then I guess what I would want to hear is, do you have any sort of red lines or outcomes that you think would be particularly bad for the community for given reasons? So Jack would be the first alphabetically.
Even though G comes before J, but never mind.
Oh, no. G. Can't do alphabet at all. Okay, we'll do GGuy first.
Hang on, are we using aliases as real names? Come on. Anyway, sorry. I'll go first. It's fine. Yeah, so I think I've proposed a couple of things, but I think my main core priorities, I guess, or beliefs for the dev fund, there's a couple. And that's really, the first is, I think the community need more power, enablement, support in making dev fund-like decisions more often. So I think one of the flaws and one of the things that's gone wrong in the last dev fund is we have this kind of 4-year period of time where we say, well, we've kind of made the decision on the dev fund, and then any time sort of discussions come up around, well, maybe the dev fund could change. Maybe we need to be a bit more agile with what the dev fund is. It's very hard to gain momentum within the community to actually see any real change or effects, or come to, for example, some sort of sentiment gathering process to make those changes. So I think that's one thing that's really important, and I think that needs to be very decentralized, where it's just a community vote. How we structure that, there's a few ways we could do that, but I think that's would be a good thing. And I think also to enable that, I think we probably need to decentralize how that sentiment gathering happens. So at the moment, sentiment gathering happens via the organizations, ECC or ZF, polling the community. I think it would be good if those questions and sentiment gathering process was governed by maybe one way of doing it would be to have some elected members to a committee do that, which I call a Zcash small council in my proposals. So that's one thing that I think is important. Another thing which I think gets overlooked a little bit is I think we have this thing called the Zcash Sustainability Fund, which hasn't been deployed yet, but I think it's a really important thing to look at protecting the future of Zcash and how we fund things. And that's not to say necessarily that that the only way Zcash is going to be successful is if a dev fund exists. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But when I think of the future of Zcash and what it could look like in 10, 20 years time or something like that, I hope it's going to be this thing that is used by heaps of people, and it's looked at as this kind of, public good that is publicly goods funded in some way of fashion. And how do we do that? And one mechanism for doing that is to fund things like we do with mining, fund things through the issuance of ZEC. But I think it's important to reflect on the things that could potentially go wrong. Like one small example, just do it really quick, is OpenAI, and you look at how they get funded, and now they've become, you know, they're meant to be this thing that's looking for the public good and blah, 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 blah. But now they're almost solely funded by Microsoft. So it's like, well, it doesn't really matter what structures you have in place. There's a centralization of funding in that open AI agreement now, and it kind of feels like Microsoft then has a lot of power over what OpenAI does. And if that becomes AGI, what does that mean for the world and the people of the world? And is it good for centralization of funding? So I think protecting against centralization of funding is equally as important as some of the other things. So those are my two sort of main beliefs. How that comes into play, there's many mechanisms which we will probably discuss today, and I think they're all pretty valid. So I think we can all work together to make those work.
I guess I'm next. You know, it's funny that you mentioned the idea of an elected council to help shape this sort of process. Because so, you know, we hear these ideas coming up on the forums and out of the community, and in some cases it feels like people are reconstructing the idea of the Zcash Foundation from first principles. You know, let's have a council or a board that's elected by the community, that then, you know, exercises decisions or makes certain decisions on behalf of that community, and that's really what we do at the Zcash Foundation. You know, the majority of the board, I'm a notable exception, are elected by ZCAP, which is a panel of over 180 members of the community, and they consult the board consults with the community through ZCAP on key questions. And the board appoints someone to run the foundation, and they, in their madness, chose me. And you know, I meet with the board. You know, we met recently, and you know, we have these great discussions, and we talk about you know, what we should consult with the community on and what we shouldn't, and you know, the sort of process of figuring out what the community wants. I think there are two clear options. Number one, you can go direct, and you know, we do that with specific ZCAP votes. For example, electing members of the Zcash Community Grants Committee, and the ZCAP can elect a body to make decisions on the community's behalf, or we can go direct to ZCAP and say, here's a specific question, we want your input on it. And that, for example, an example of that is when the foundation consulted ZCAP about whether the foundation should make it a priority to keep Zcash ASIC resistant. And the community said that they should not. And that's, you know, one of the reasons why mining of Zcash is now dominated by ASICs. So another use where we go directly recently was for minor grants. We looked at we looked at minor grants. We thought this is intended to be a fairly small, you know, thing, so we can experiment with a bit. Let's see what happens if we go direct to the community and see how they make decisions about grants. And I think in fact, I personally think that the decisions made by ZCAP were a lot more conservative than even I would have been. I think I would have approved more of those grants. But yeah, like it's always going to be tricky trying to figure out how to make decisions, because decision making is a form of power. So by taking a role of stewarding the process of decision making, you're going to make yourself a target for those who want to influence the decision. And you know, we see a lot of criticism of both myself personally and the Zcash Foundation as an entity. You know, what I would say is that we do our best, we do listen, and at the end of the day, you know, it's impossible to keep everybody happy. There are alternative ideas that people have suggested. You know, people have talked about coin holder voting. People have talked about quadratic funding. You know, these various ideas. But ultimately, I think the real test of whether someone believes in a mechanism for decision making is to embrace it themselves. And we've done so with ZCAP because ZCAP is used to appoint our board. So before anybody else puts forward a proposal, I'd like to see them use it themselves for key decisions that directly affect them. So that kind of explains why we use ZCAP, and I'd emphasize that we are totally open to hearing and listening to input gathered or polling gathered from other sources or through other mechanisms, so long as it's done in good faith. Like if we saw a decision made by ZCAP, but we saw overwhelming evidence from other sources that indicated that decision by ZCAP did not reflect the clear consensus of the Zcash community, then we would have a long, hard think about that and have a board meeting, discuss it. It's funny, Peter sometimes pushes back on me saying, I think this is something you should decide, Jack. And I'm like, no, this needs to be a board decision. But it means that we get that we get the benefit of that direct input from the community, along with a little bit of a sanity check, and of course the benefit of the experience and the expertise that sits on the board, particularly with regards to the legal aspects of it. We have I think 3 or at least 2 lawyers and 1 law professor on the board at the moment, which is absolutely invaluable. And having a board like that means that board can receive legal advice. We can't necessarily share that legal advice with the rest of the community, because doing so would breach client-attorney privilege and cause problems. But I would hope that people in the community trust that people like Peter, Marta, Andrew, Amber, and JW all have the best interests of the community at heart. Now, in terms of how we get how we reach a decision, like I said, we haven't put forward a proposal. My own personal view is that the Zcash project would benefit from ongoing funding. I think it definitely needs to evolve. I think it needs to be more focused. I think we need to listen more to the community in terms of what we should be prioritizing. I think that there's a question that will come up later around whether we should be focusing on building the rails or focusing on helping people build on top of those rails. And I think that my personal view is that we should be building the rails. That's obviously shaped by my own background and whatnot. But definitely I want to see it being more decentralized. And I think that it's important to remember that decentralization is not just about making decisions, and it's not just about who gets the money. It's also about capability. And it's taken us at the foundation, several years to build up the capability, to build software for Zcash, to build Zebra. I would caution against jumping to the conclusion that just giving money to another organization is going to mean that they can instantly start to contribute meaningfully. I should give a shout out to Kedit, who have that capability in terms of their expertise with zero knowledge proofs and whatnot. So it's a difficult problem to figure out how to craft the question that we're going to put, or the questions that we're going to pose to the community. There have been a bunch of different proposals. Some of them fit within there are certain commonalities that you can break them down into, like the percentage of issuance, the duration of the fund, the who receives it, and how those funds get split. And if you look at the different proposals that have been put forward, specifically by GGuy and Noamchom, JGX7, who isn't with us today, and Josh, they all pretty much they can all be categorized into one of those. And I published a blog post, a forum post, which illustrates that recently. I think the process of reaching consensus is going to be iterative. We're not going to just have a single vote and then that's it. If we want to make sure that the community has the ability to reach a genuine consensus, we can't just pick the highest voted option. We have to narrow things down, discard the options that have the least support, and then try to see if we can get consensus on one of the remaining options. And that's essentially what we did the first time round with 13 different proposals that were put forward. So it's not a clean, easy, simple process. It's messy, and those sausages will be made in public. And it may be that we go down a certain path in terms of polling, and then we discover that actually we've backed ourselves into a corner that nobody supports, and we need to reverse back and go down a different path. But I can say that we at the foundation are 100% committed to making sure that the community has the opportunity to collectively share their views on what should happen, and we are committed to enacting that, even if it defunds the foundation and we end up facing the prospect of eventually having to shut down.
Josh?
Okay, so the question is a perspective on it, or if we want to give a perspective on the fund. And we have, we've taken a position. So, I think there's Dodger broke it down in some different ways. I think there's two fundamental questions. Is there debt? Should there be a debt fund? And if there is a debt fund, what should the structure be of that thing? So the first question, should there be a debt fund? Right. That's one that I hope that the foundation and others ask the community very clearly, A or B, right? So ECC would welcome a debt fund. I think as ZF would welcome a debt fund. If the community chooses not to create a new debt fund and stay with the status quo, which is that it runs out in November, then that's fine. We're prepared to move on, and we'll stay engaged with the community, and we'll just, what it does is it just forces us to get creative and find other ways of getting funded, which we will go do. The second is that, if there is a debt fund in that kind of scenario, there's a couple structures underneath that have surfaced. So one structure is a direct allocation of funds from the chain, from consensus rules, like what it is today. So CCG through ZF receives 8%. We receive 7% through Bootstrap, and then the foundation receives 5%. And the wallets are embedded in consensus rules. And as GGuy talked about, it's 4 years. And if you're going to change that, you got to fork it. And so that is one option, is that we say, okay, we want to change it for some period of time, and people can, vote for their favorite project to receive whatever percentage of the debt fund that they think. The other option is to move to a purely grants-based model. And so I mean, we can talk about it. I won't go into all the details here because it's not necessary. It's a proposal, but it's not the proposal for the dev fund. I just want to separate those two things. So if we have a grants-based model that is legitimately run by the community and decentralized, we think that's a better option. We think it's a better for kind of decentralization, breaking down some of the brittleness. And so, Peter, actually, I want to quote you. I wrote it down, and I'm gonna totally take you out of context, but I loved it. It says, if your electronic cash relies on corporate checkpoints, you built the wrong electronic cash. And if it relies on corporate entities, and the protocol won't survive without those entities, or that it becomes brittle because there's entities in the middle, then we haven't built the right electronic cash. Our position is that the whole dev fund must shift from sustaining organizations to driving outcomes. And Zucky Manian, who sits on the Bootstrap board, and he's a leader in the Cosmos community, and he put out a tweet and said, any future dev fund must shift to strategic goals rather than sustaining organizations. Vitalik also put something out recently talking about the dev fund, saying that it was his suggestion that we look at retroactive funding. That's kind of hard to do. There's some conversations in that in the forum, but it's interesting, right? As different mechanisms. All that is to say that we feel so strongly that addresses shouldn't be embedded in the chain. That this is something that we had It served its purpose. Now it's time to move forward with a different model. The ECC said, we won't accept funding directly from the chain. Now it puts us at risk, right? Because that's where our funding is. And we've got some other assets, yes, but it doesn't guarantee long-term sustainability. People get nervous about it, but what it means is we would still want to try to apply for grants. And we would want to be accountable for our work. In a grants-based model, these organizations could continue to exist and continue to support functions, but it may change the nature in which they receive funding. So for example, in the proposal that I put out, without getting on details, ZF could, for example, say, okay, we want funding for 1 year to be able to support Zebra D. We're going to do monthly reporting. This is the outcome that we're going to deliver for this period of time. And the community can then decide whether or not it wants to fund that thing, or whether it wants to fund something else, or whether it sees its priorities. And actually, ZF, we'd love to fund you, but we'd love to fund you to do this other thing based upon, as Dodger said, the set of expertise. And then the foundation decides whether or not it'd want to pursue a grant. Those kind of models are really interesting, but this is like such an important, we're at an inflection point. We get to make this decision now as a community. It's such an important decision. Let's not screw it up. We have weeks, not months, to make a decision to get any kind of change in the consensus rules ahead of a November activation, if we're trying to get something in when the current at the current happening, when the fund runs out. So my suggestion or proposal to the community is to say, yes, let's move to a more decentralized mechanism that drives outcomes, that has greater community involvement. But it's going to take us some time to do that and to sort it out. And let's recognize that. And rather than try to shoehorn that in the network upgrade this November, let's give it a year. Let's give it a year and say, the mandate is to come up with this thing that the community can all rally around, that has these attributes. And we'll just extend the existing dev fund so it doesn't choke anybody off and people can plan. But by the way, it's 50% less tokens because of the halvening. But let's extend it a year, and it gives people some more time. It gives the community more time to create a model that is substantive, that is not brittle, that is agile, that will drive us for years to come.
All right, let's get to Noam.
Thanks. So, like someone who does their homework, I prepared statements. So I'm just going to read here for a minute or two, and then I've got a meme, and then I will go through the rundown of my proposal and my thinking around why I picked numbers and pointed fingers at different organizations. Zcash has the potential to become a heavily adopted world-class blockchain that opens up new doors for users seeking privacy-critical financial services and assets. I've long held the belief that the crypto markets, and more broadly, the global base of crypto users, are deeply underestimating the value of financial privacy. The Zcash teams have a decorated legacy of delivering breakthrough innovations, which have trailblazed for the privacy and zero-knowledge proof sector of the crypto industry. Under the right circumstances, I believe that these teams can be expected to continue to do so for years and even decades to come. In large part, we can all acknowledge that the protocol-coded dev funding model served both the individuals and teams that they compose to enable them to deliver these unprecedented series of innovations. While Zcash's protocol and infrastructure technology and the broader ecosystem of technology and people around it are AAA grade, quite literally the highest grade, the same can't be said today about the Zcash native unit of exchange, ZEC. ZEC has been unable to store value, let alone grow value consistently in almost a decade of market presence. The picture is especially bleak compared between ZEC and other crypto assets, rather than just compared against government fiats. This has created a conundrum. This uncomfortable truth has led the Zcash teams and the ecosystem into what is hopefully a temporary cycle of distress, soul-seeking, replanning, descoping, rescoping, some finger pointing. Some people have packed up and left. we've all been here and experienced the pain points that price has inflicted on the project. Unfortunately, we don't have a magic button that can change the behavior of the markets, which we would like to see positively impact the ecosystem. So what are we left with? We're left with ourselves. We're each individuals, we make up teams, we provide intellect, energy, memes, we have keyboards, we write white papers, we peer review code, we peer review papers, we peer review law, we do everything. We have to have, we trust ourselves, and we have to have conviction in this project. Our beliefs in Zcash and what we want to give to the world are what can collectively move the needle to take Zcash mainstream. I feel that retaining a dev fund is a means to protect the core of the project. The people who have the infrastructure knowledge, the people who have the legal knowledge, who understand the corporate knowledge, the people who have invested countless hours, and the people who invest to continue to spend countless hours in the future. And we would like to protect the organizations that have been built, and these are US based, and they've been built to serve Zcash and serve everyone else in the community that does the building and the delivery. Thanks. So now I've got a meme. By the way, I'm a software test engineer, not a car salesman. This is what I think of when I think of Zcash. I think of a privacy-centric blockchain network that selects features from Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Tether. Tether is where we get the ability to be commerce for the planet. People spend in fiat, not crypto assets. Crypto assets are stores of value. They are scarce, and they are, they're everything else that we love. Ethereum is programmable. It has second layer application features. It has meme coins. It has DeFi. It has everything that, the Zebra node upgrade is slowly going to begin to deliver on. This is what I think we're looking for in the future. And hopefully if I'm talking about a ship of Theseus of Zcash, we're all seeing something like this. The bonus meme, if I click the right button here in Paint, is this, right? The dev fund is it's a marriage proposal. Does your organization want to be married to the Zcash protocol for the next 4 years? A grants-based model is more like swiping around on Tinder. So your organization can continue to stay involved, but there's nothing, we're not setting up things like marriage. My thinking is very, I've gone back and forth on this. Some of you that have noted my position, a year and a half ago, I was advocating against the dev fund, but as I've thought heavily on it, I think that it creates an obligation that is stronger than a grants-only model. So, and I do like the idea of a grants model, but I think that there's like maybe a more appropriate transition phase. I'm not sure if we're ready to jump the gap to grants only. Again, this is all up for debate. So the details of my proposal, I am recommending that we invite Kedit and Shielded Labs into direct block subsidy. I think this is because they are two organizations that are slowly trying to build subject matter expertise at the protocol layer. I think that there's a risk at losing those organizations. So I think block subsidy gives them an incentive to stick around and to feel more than just fortunate to have had temporary grants approved. The second thing that's notable is that rather than 20%, the total allocation that I've proposed is 15%. I think that, part of the distress that we're kind of looking at as investors, speculators, and builders is that, ZEC is not it doesn't look like a great crypto asset right now, and having, whether we stop it or not, will create scarcity that, likely changes everyone's treasury balance at the end of the day. But we don't know what the market is going to do. Nobody knows what the market's going to do. So part of the reason why I reduced the total allocation was to kind of shift the scarcity balance on the token economics. I think that's all I've got. Well, no, so I have a couple more things, right? I spoke to both Jonathan and to Jason informally to get kind of like a nod that they're not like passionately opposed to accepting dev funds. So if my recommendation to add those two organizations gains traction, then there would be some technical details to work through with regard to how funds would be distributed. Jonathan had noted that it might make sense to ask Jack Nicely for the ZF to act as a kind of a custodian to Kedit, like they do for ZCG right now. That might make sense. That's all up to future discussions. And then the last thing that I added, right? So I just sort of said that, okay, this is a copy paste from 1013. I think in general, 1013 is very well written, but I did add an additional gentleman's agreement to kind of recommend that we shouldn't be, the community should keep an eye on treasuries to make sure that Shielded Labs doesn't take a bunch of ZAC and then buy a bunch of Dogecoin because they think Dogecoin is a better asset to sit on the balance sheet. So it wouldn't be enforceable. It would be nothing more than just kind of hand waving, stop sign, violation enforcement. That's all I've got. Thanks.
So I want to get to some of the communities, some of the questions on FOVA. And there's one that's actually sort of apropos to the discussion we're at right now. Grants or grant or retroactive grant model versus I like this, Noam, you're married to Zcash, and that can be good and that can be bad. We had a question that said ECC stated they wouldn't be receiving funds, that they wouldn't want to receive funds on a hard-coded address. If direct funding is the accepted proposal and ECC ends up requesting large grants from ZCG, wouldn't that disrupt the grants balance, like when Cardano funding companies ended up being granted all the fund money because of their weight? Wouldn't that alter fairness in the ecosystem? So I feel like we can be a little broader about this question too, and just generally talk about the advantages and disadvantages of a grants model versus a more long-term commitment model. But I'll let Josh take that first because it's directed pretty much at the ECC.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a hard time with hypotheticals. They're kind of like mosquitoes. They're everywhere. They're kind of and they have the potential to kind of spread disease. And the reason that I say that is because what you do is you start to kind of implant ideas about what, like, different scenarios, and we haven't even yet really dug in with the community. I don't believe. I mean, yeah. Jack's done some initial polling and all that kind of stuff, and
I guess to reframe the question then, to make it a bit more fair, just do you see competition for grants as being something that ultimately drives better outcomes or could potentially end up oligopic? I think of this a lot in the context of just all the mostly bad governance mechanisms that exist in crypto. It's like, yeah, you could do direct coin holder voting, but then, the giant VCs that own all the coins end up running the show on several large DeFi projects I know of that I won't name by name. And yeah, there's a centralization aspect to having a nonprofit foundation as a hard-coded recipient, but at least they're a nonprofit foundation and not a VC that's actually secretly running the show, right? So, like, how much do we want to rely on some sort of on-chain or quasi-on-chain mechanism for grant making and grant requests and grant funding versus soft power, which is like, we have a nonprofit with a mission and we do things transparently, so you're going to see if we're not living up to it, right?
Yeah, but there's a question is, and I'm not saying that the foundation's doing a bad job, but is there, if the community says the foundation's doing a bad job, can we fire them? And so that, you know, and fund somebody else who we think would do a better job, right? And, we're talking about the marriage stuff. There is a concept of like, is there a way to get a divorce, or are you just locked in, no matter what?
Sure.
Well,
Jonathan, immediate.
Go ahead.
Well,
No.
if it's okay, let me explain. So the grant-based model I put out there, I'm concerned about the same things. So in that kind of a model, it's a K of N multi-sig on funding for grants with independent organizations and broad community representation who all get the ability to sign. And to say somebody submits a grant, there's some kind of arbitrary threshold on what that is, or there's some kind of threshold that's set based upon what that is. The people that are participating in that key signing can change over time. So that can be flexible without having to do consensus change. So as organizations come in or come out, they participate in that structure. And then the organization, if an organization is a holder of a key and they apply for the grant, then obviously they have to abstain. But you get the signatures and the funds get released, and you can do shorter bursts of time that drive accountability for outcomes. To say, in order to get this money, it's not based on what I've done in the past. I've been a good guy in the past. You should continue to give me money for the next 4 years because I'll be a good guy for the next 4 years. I don't know what 4 years looks like. I don't think we have 4 years. Like, to Noam's point, like we're falling behind. We're not moving fast enough. And so how do we incent organizations to do more quicker and get paid based upon accountable results? And I think that kind of a model, and I also think that it helps drive alignment. So one of the questions in the community has been, like, do we all have separate goals or do we have common alignment? If you've got a broad representation, you have a group of people that are signing for funding, and they are independently making an assessment as to whether or not this thing should be funded, then that demonstrates alignment and it helps kind of narrow the funding to the things that the broader community wants the most. So thank you for reframing that question. That helped me out a ton. And whoever asked it, I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to insult that. I understand the risk.
No, it's good. I think that would be satisfying to them as well. Yeah. Okay. Did somebody want to respond to that?
No. I don't have anything to disagree with, but I just wanted to add. So I have almost 10 years of experience with organizations that have human safety rated software, and some of the software engineers that I have worked with have. They have code commits from 1995 on braking and propulsion systems in transportation enterprises. So subject matter expertise is something that we have to talk about. The ECC and the ZF are sitting on it. And there's no way to kind of like force people to become subject matter experts if it's even possible with regard to the Zcash protocol layer. So we can go through the abstract. I think we all agree in the ideal sense. I agree with Josh. Like, we need to spread out competency, beyond just two organizations. But in a very practical sense, it's a huge challenge. And I think that we need to be making sure to balance how fast we think that can actually be done. So, I just wanted to add that point. Like, we need to be talking about subject matter expertise. Because giving someone's organization a grant for $500,000 to do something in 6 months runs the risk that they kind of look at Zcash's protocol, they put forward a very responsible proposal, but at the end of 6 months, they could still be scratching their head because there's, there are these learning curves. There's like a point of inertia that most software engineers break. There's, we've got to just acknowledge that there's so much in-house human capital with the ZF and the ECC. And I think slowly KEDIT is getting there. I just think that there's like, what is the balance and what is the timeline and what's really practically going to work?
Jack?
Yeah, I think there's two ways of looking at this. The one approach is to say, this is what we should do. And this is why. Because it solves these problems. Another approach is to look at the problems and to see whether we agree that they are in fact problems, and then to brainstorm the best solutions to them. So, a great example, I think, is the problem that the first dev fund was locked in for 4 years. Now, in reality, that wasn't the case, because if the ZIP 1014 was changed on a number of occasions, and so anybody could have proposed a change, and if there had been sufficient, I think, community support for it, I'm pretty sure that ECC and ZF would have considered it. But I do agree that there was this anchoring effect in place, that because it said 4 years, everybody kind of assumed it was going to last 4 years. And speaking for myself personally, not on behalf of the foundation, I definitely think that any future dev fund needs to be an awful lot shorter. If it is going to be one that's embedded in the protocol, it has to be a lot shorter. And or there needs to be an expectation and a willingness to make changes to it regularly. So if we look at the Zcash Community Grants Committee, there's turnover, there's regular turnover there. There's no expectation that the same people are going to be there for 4 years. There are scheduled elections that take place, and we could have a similar thing, even if the dev fund is embedded in the protocol. The whole subject matter expert thing, is a really important one, because it touches a few different aspects, and one of those aspects is that, and it was Cody Burns who kind of highlighted this on the forum recently, and it's something that has been an issue for years. Because of the Founders Reward, and then because the Dev Fund came around, there has been this attitude, I think, of don't pay, don't play. And I'm quoting Cody Burns directly there. In the early days, obviously the Electric Coin Company was the one receiving all the funds, and there were community contributors, but they struggled to finance themselves. And ECC, and I was a key part of this decision as well. And with hindsight, I wish we'd looked at it in a different light. We took the view that we didn't want to fund everything that was being done for Zcash, because that would lead to people becoming reliant on ECC. In a way, that's kind of been what's happened with the dev fund. Nobody's building stuff for Zcash, or very few people are building stuff for Zcash, unless they're receiving a grant of some kind. And I'm not sure how to fix that. Some people have said, look, we just need to cut it off and let the thing sink or swim. And then I for one would continue to work on Zcash in whatever capacity I could, and support it, and to try to contribute to it, but I wouldn't be able to do so full time. And I don't think that I think very few of the people who currently do so full time would be able to continue to do that. There's a separate conversation to be had about the runways that different organizations have, but yeah. So the subject matter expertise, is highly concentrated, and it was something that I struggled with when I was trying to build an organization that could build Zebra. We didn't have the option of bringing in expertise from the Electric Coin Company, and that meant that we had to build it from scratch, and that took time. And we have a huge advantage in Kedit, in that they already have the zero knowledge proofs expertise that is, they are now using to build ZSAs. And I think that that's a great example of where we've managed to draw in an organization, a team who have expertise that they can immediately contribute to the underlying protocol. And I think it's important that we make sure we're able to continue doing that. At the same time, we need to make sure that we avoid a tragedy of the commons, where people only want to work on the interesting stuff. We've seen this with Zcash. The Zcash has been deprecated. There's no interest on the part of ECC to upgrade it and to maintain it. And there's a gap now. There's a gap between the capabilities that Zcash offers and what's available through Zebra and other solutions. And that gap now means that the deployment of ZSAs is likely to be pushed back further than it would otherwise be if that gap didn't exist. So one of the reasons I'm not a huge and I say one of the reasons because there are a number of reasons, but one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of the grants only funding is who does the boring, crappy work? Who does the unpopular, boring work that no, talented developer really wants to do, but they do so reluctantly because they're told to, in a world where everything is grant funded, then everybody's going to be saying, look at this great idea I've got, and it's so sexy and it's so cool, and it gets everybody's support. And meanwhile, the guy is going, hey, we need to keep the electricity running. We need to keep the sewage getting pumped. Isn't anywhere near as sexy. So that's a risk that I see with a pure grants funded.
Yeah. Public goods aren't very sexy, which is why they're chronically underfunded, and because you can't exclude free riders. GGuy, you're muted.
Sorry, I clicked unhand. So I'll be quick because I know we're running out of time, but I think it's important to note that my proposal kind of fits with some of the ideas of grants-based funding. My proposal absolutely was around the ideas that the organizations or the receiver of the dev funds, their portion declines over time, so less reliant over time. And I think it's also important to note that the proposal was that every network upgrade, we can change who those recipients are and what they receive. So I view my proposal as a grant-like based proposal, but every network upgrade, the community gets to vote and say, and the idea is it puts incentives in place, and I think incentives are so important, puts incentive in place on the receivers of those dev funds to put their proposals and really think about their business use cases and everything else, because they're going to be proposing every network upgrade to the community and saying, this is what I want to spend the next 9 months or whatever it is doing. Will you fund this? I think that's important. But at the same time, I think it's equally as valid for some kind of K of N, organizations voting on stuff, and the community, of course, as a grants-based model. It's equally valid. So I don't really want to argue any of those points. But I will just say that I think it's important that if we do go to some sort of block system, as the ECC or Josh has proposed, that there be something at the top that makes sure that I hope every network upgrade, that's my sort of idea, the community gets to revote and say, is this working? And if it is working, yes, continue. If it's not working, how do we adjust it and stuff like that? I also think that we need to not think in binary terms. So, there's lots of debates about retroactive and proactive and community-based and engineered-based decisions and committee-based decisions, etc. They all have pros and cons. So why not just do them all, right? The easiest thing for me to think up, and I'm not saying this is what we should do, but the easiest thing to do right now would just be to say, all right, well, let's split it up between all things. Let's find a way to have 3 separate pools. One of those pools is community-based decisions. One of those pools is engineer-based decisions. The other is community-based decisions, and set it up as a grant structure and go at it. I think that's quite a valid way of doing things. And that's all I've got. And the only other thing which we also don't discuss a lot is it viable, for example, and a good thing, for example, for us to just float out there the idea of a 3% Zcash Sustainability Fund tax, to say, we love all of these things. We love the dev fund. We need to secure this for the future. If we don't, it's like retirement, right? If you don't start saving now for your retirement, you can't save later, right? That's what I think of Zcash. So if we think the dev fund and funding from ZEC issuance is a good idea for the future as well, maybe thinking about putting 3% aside for the ZSF might be a good idea too. Anyway, that's it.
We're rapidly reaching the end of what I thought was a very long session, but maybe we didn't get to as much as we'd hoped. I'm gonna let Josh have the last word, I think, unless you had only a brief comment, then maybe we can do a round robin. I'm okay with you having
we can do a round robin. That's fine. I don't want to monopolize the end of the time. So I just wanted to respond to something Dodger said about who wants to do the gritty work, and you'll get all these people want to do the shiny object stuff. So nothing precludes in the grants-based model. One, it's not a tragedy of the commons because it is getting funding off the chain. So there's funding available. And two, nothing precludes any organization from receiving long-term funding, including whatever that ball of materials is that they're requesting funding for. So if any organization said, like ECC went forward and say, okay, we would like you to fund our full operations for the next 4 years, I would probably assume that the community would say no. Like, we want to see some kind of accountability, we want to see tighter deadlines, we want to see, but there's some kind of middle ground possibility. And so it doesn't necessarily dissuade for somebody from participating in that way. Sometimes we think about grants in very discrete little balls, right? And it's like this piece of work, there's no overhead involved. We say, we know to run these organizations, there's overhead involved. We've got HR processes, we've got stuff, so that kind of stuff can be in a grant. It also allows for like some novel kinds of things where, so ZCG, for example, there's been conversations that the ZCG members get paid more for the amount of work that they're doing. So why can't ZCG apply to the community for a grant to receive additional funding? And the community can make that decision. And if the ZCG members say, oh, we can't because it's not enough money for the time, then they're out. But so be it. I mean, that becomes a conversation. Any of these things, it allows for this kind of agility. Maybe the final word that I'll say is, one of the challenges is we have this, if we agree that Zcash is a public good, we're taking organizations with all their flaws, right? Flaws is maybe not the right word, with all of the kind of fragility that goes with it. Like, do they have funding available? They're in a regulated, area that we've seen the crackdowns. Does that get more heated? Leadership changes, employees change, there's attrition. So they may not be as good as they once were. They may be more good as they once were. But we're taking these organizations and saying, for some period of time, we're going to bed them into a public good, into a worldwide public good. We get to choose these wallets, and they have this guaranteed funding out of that public good. I just think there's a better model where we don't directly tie specific organizations to the chain.
So to sort of round up the discussion, I want to let our audience know that I've seen most of your questions on WOVA, I think, and there's a bunch of really good questions that have come up about specifically funding certain types of things with the Dev Fund. Like, a great question just came in about more funding for things like community education projects like ZecHub and Zcash Brazil. We had 2 questions about the choices, perhaps best exemplified by the choices of the foundation, but general choices to favor infrastructure versus, say, use cases and say shopkeepers was the example in the question. I have not posed these questions, in part because we only have so much time, and because these are sort of questions about what should we spend money on, not how should the dev fund be structured. And if anything, these questions indicate that there's at least some preference in the community to structure the dev fund in a way where the community can directly sort of request funds for certain purposes, rather than rely on organizations to sort of figure that out for themselves, even if they're nonprofits that have to embody the will of the community. So to give everyone sort of a last word, I want you to say, like, what's the thing? Let's end on a positive note. What's the thing you would really like to see the public good better funded in this future dev fund or not dev fund? What's the thing that makes you really excited about building in the next 1 year, if that's the epoch for the next dev fund, or the next 4 years, or let's keep it, soon. We'll go around in the order we did before. So GGuy, Dodger, Josh, and then Noam.
What to fund? Okay, so get it, great. Community things, great. Security, great. And also, I think we also need to, it's very easy in times like this to say, constraints, on financial constraints, but I think we also need to make sure there's some sort of out of the box thinking and innovation occurring, because if you stagnate for too long, you very much become a thing of the past, I think. And then all of the other things, I think proof of stake is very important. I also think scalability is very important and very underappreciated. We really need to look at those things. So how we fund all of those, who knows? But I think it's like, but I think just to reflect, one last reflection on the comment that you made, and community-based funding and stuff like that, I think it is important that there are different, not sources, but different decision makers in funding processes. Like the engineers are going to know best about engineering type projects and protocol type projects. You know, the community is going to know best about community type projects. Committees might be best for outreach like things and interview like processes. Like ZCG, for example, when we hired the Zcash community security lead, is that what it's called? I've forgotten now. Mind blank. We interviewed like 8 or 9 organizations to do that. It was a really big task. A community on their own can't do that. Engineers shouldn't be wasting their time doing that. So I think that there's room for those things to occur. So I think, yeah, when we think about these structures, put them in place so that we get the pros of all of the different entities and stuff like that. Let's not think in binary terms and think this is the only way. And yeah, we'll have good outcomes for Zcash if we do that, I think.
Jack?
So first of all, the thing I'm most excited about is ZSA's finally, you know, the Zcash as a product hasn't significantly changed in nearly 8 years. And I'm so looking forward to the, you know, the rest of the world has moved on and we've been kind of stuck with the same thing. And you know, the various reasons for that, including, you know, kind of tech debt that needed to be, you know, resolved and gotten rid of. But oh my God, I'm so looking forward to having new functionality. And you know, there's a lot of things that we can focus on have been named: community and Rails and engineering and research and all the rest. And I think what I would love to see, you know, happen, I'm not sure it's gonna happen, but what I'd love to see happen is a sense of or a set of priorities emerge, very clear hierarchy of priorities, and a sense of urgency about those priorities. I really worry that, you know, we've been kind of fiddling around the edges and trying to and allowing perfection in certain cases to be very much the enemy of progress. And meanwhile, the rest of the world has been innovating and moving forward. So yeah, I'm a big fan of something that Steve Jobs once said, which was that focus is about saying no to lots of things, and saying no can be really, really uncomfortable. Yes, we should have community, you know, engagement. We should have people building stuff on Zcash and whatnot. But if you're honest with yourself about when it comes to setting priorities, you have to say no to everything that's not going to be one of your priorities. If you say yes to everything, then nothing's a priority. And you know, that's what I did when I joined the foundation. I said, right, we're going to focus on Zebra, we're going to focus on Frost, and we're going to focus on community support. And you know, as we move forward, that's been our focus for the last 3 years. And there are lots of things that have come in, and you know, we've had to say no to them. And there have obviously, you know, we've done other little things that fall outside of those areas. But I think, you know, it's really important to remember that at the end of the day, Zcash itself, the protocol itself, is a product that competes with a whole bunch of other products, most of which do not include privacy. We have to make sure that Zcash is able to stand on its own 2 feet against something like Bitcoin, against something like Ethereum. And if people are looking at something like Ethereum and they're going, well, this gives me the ability to run smart contracts, and that becomes a key differentiating factor for them, then we need to be looking at that as well. You know, it doesn't matter how pretty, it doesn't matter how many great meetups you have, it doesn't matter how great ZCon is, and I have to say it's pretty great. I'm very impressed with the team with the job that the ops and comms and media team have done. I can take no credit for it whatsoever. It doesn't matter how pretty your wallet is, or whether we have the best solution for resolving the confusion around different types of addresses. If at its base layer, you know, if the car that looks like a Ferrari is running on a 2-stroke, you know, 0.5 liter engine, you're not going to get people buying it, you know? And if you're having to pay people to build products, to build shops on Zcash, then there's something fundamentally wrong with your core product. And I think that that's where we need to be. That's where we need to be focusing. And this is kind of addressing one of the questions that came in on the chat of why I think we need to be focusing on Rails. I don't think we focused on Rails enough over the past 4 years. In fact, over the past 7 years, I would say. You know, I think that we haven't listened to the market. We haven't, you know, looked at what's really important. What is it that's driving people to use these new forms of currency, and making sure that we're able to deliver them both those key differentiating features that they want and the privacy that we believe is important.
Okay. Josh?
Yeah. Adoption. So, like, I appreciate the need for the Rails, and we need the Rails to the point. Like, we need the Rails to be able to support what we want to do. But we should build the Rails before we discover the users. And so, and really meet the users where they're at. And who are the users that we want? And what are they doing? And where is it letting them down? Are they, so one of the things with ECC, right? And if you saw my talk on Monday, and some of the stuff we've been talking about is really working on building a full stack for Zcash in a new system outside the old system. Like, not trying to build a system that conforms to legacy financial systems and all the brittleness and the things that come there, like what we've seen with Bitcoin. But what does it mean to have a thriving kind of network of people that are able to use a full stack of products? And what is it that they want? Is it that they want just a simple wallet for private payments? Do they want programmability? Do they want to be able to collateralize their assets in order to get credit across chain, right? What are those things? And let's build those things. And if we're building the wrong things, we're going to know pretty quickly, because folks aren't going to use it. Right now, folks aren't using it enough. Like the amount of shielded transactions, you look at the amount of shielded transactions, which is, by the way, freaking brilliant, best in class, best in the world. And the line just goes like this, right, over our history. We haven't driven enough adoption. So that's where I'm hoping we get to, is that we get that moment where we have the full stack of tools that are available for users that allow this thing to kind of really take off.
Noam, last word.
Sure. So I've got remarks and then a joke that I just came up with. So tune out. Beware, you're warned.
Not a meme? I'm shocked.
No, this is off the top of my head. Zcash, I think that the dev fund, you know, I'm advocating for it. I think that there is infrastructure work, there's protocol R&D, there's maintenance, there are, you know, keeping subject matter experts happy, comfortable, and productive. I think that direct subsidy makes sense for that context. But I also welcome a broadening and growth of everything else that we could consider as grant-based. That's media, education, outreach, legal, podcasts, conferences. You know, I think that we can probably all agree that most work going into Zcash could be divided across some sort of line that either involves software or it involved soft social skills and other things like that. That's kind of the base of what my beliefs are. So the joke, what happens when a software engineer retires? The answer, right? They become either a 38-year-old project manager at an enterprise company, or they become a 68-year-old chicken farmer. My opinion is that Zcash should strive to produce as many chicken farmers as possible. We want our human capital to be in the ecosystem for a long time. We don't want to overbloat the organization with managers. You know, we want, you know, I'm talking about subject matter experts because in my day job, I work with them I test their code. I occasionally break their code. They occasionally rewrite software. Zcash, the zero knowledge proof sector of cryptocurrency, is just, it's at the cutting edge, and the talent that exists that can interact with the protocol, we got to protect them at all costs.
We want farm fresh eggs.
We want eggs. Yeah, that's right. We eventually want nice eggs.
Excellent. Well, thank you to the four of you for participating on this long discussion, but a valuable discussion. I want to urge the panelists to keep checking the WOVA app, and I want to urge the audience to vote for questions on that app that haven't been addressed in this panel, and we can keep the discussion going in text. So with that, thank you all for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Great to speak to y'all.